Northern Power Women podcast. For your career and your life, no matter what business you're in.
Hello, I'm Sam Walker and welcome to a brand new episode 3 of the Northern Power Women podcast. Pinch me on the cheek at your peril. On the way, you'll hear from Julia Fawcett. She's the Chief Executive of the Lowry in Salford, one of the largest performance and visual arts centres in the UK. She talks about why vulnerability should be something that's discussed without prejudice in the workplace, and she's very honest about the challenges she's faced and the very difficult decisions that she's had to make in her career.
And I really wrestled with that. I'd spent 10 years building up my reputation. I'd got to the point where that next step was on the table, but it was taking me into a direction that I knew I genuinely did not want to go in.
In Ask The Hive this month, a place where you ask the question and the Northern Power Women Network provides a host of advice, we talk about why tech is facing a challenge in recruiting people outside the middle classes.
The best case scenario, kids don't have hot water in their house. And on the worst case scenario, the teachers are providing the girls with sanitary towels because they can't even afford that.
And in our discussion group, our panellists chew over 3 juicy subjects and things, as ever, get a bit lively.
I think that's a bit of a cop-out, actually. It's very easy to say that and then that's the end of the problem. It's women's problem because they're not speaking up, and I don't think that's the case.
But first, let's check in with the founder of Northern Power Women, the one and only Simone Roche, for some news from HQ.
Episode 3 and the support for this podcast just keeps on growing. We're delighted to say we've had over 1,500 downloads, and that's just after 2 episodes. And we are just completely thrilled to bits. Please do keep sharing and reviewing. Send us your comments. We'd like to hear about what you want more of, what you'd like to be talked about on this podcast. It's here for you. Please leave a review and let us know what you think. We're really excited that this month we're going to be opening the nominations for the 3rd Northern Power Women Awards. And we're looking for you to recognise your role models, trailblazers, agents of change and innovators who are driving and accelerating the gender equality agenda from the North. We're also going to be growing our future and power lists, celebrating the success of those of our up-and-coming and our leaders and those influencing the agenda. This month we're also launching our NPW Hour on Twitter, a weekly exchange every Thursday at midday, so please do join the conversation at North Power Women and have your say. We're keen to hear from our Northern Power Women returners as we're working on an opportunity for those of you who are coming back after career breaks, whether it be year, 10 years, please do get in touch because we'd like to get you involved in this great opportunity. Have a great month and please keep sharing the podcast.
As ever, thank you so much to Simone. And just to echo what she said, we would love you to get in touch. You can follow everything that Northern Power Women does online at northernpowerwomen.com and also on Twitter at North Power Women. Now, to this month's discussion panel. Thank you to everyone who came along to be part of the audience. Do check Twitter, actually, for details of how you can be part of next month's audience. And thank you very much indeed to The Landing as well in Salford, who hosted us this month. And a big thanks, of course, to our great panellists who discussed job sharing at a senior level, keeping your plans for a family secret, and whether women need to take responsibility for the gender pay gap. Thank you so much and welcome to the Northern Power Women podcast episode 3. Without further ado, let me introduce the 3 women who are going to be talking to you today. We have Rebecca Taylor, who's co-founder of CLOS, which supports tech businesses, also co-founder of Women in Tech North meetup group, mum to 4-year-old Ethan. I love the fact that's the last thing you put when it's the most difficult thing.
Yeah, it's definitely the most important thing.
Also a big hello to Erica Ingham. She's CFO of Mediacom North, passionate about instilling diversity and equality through all levels of business. Just an aside, if you're thinking Mediacom North, I know that name. Winners, of course, of the Medium Business Awards and the Northern Power Women Awards this year. And also a big hello to Maya Dibley. She's head of programmes and partnerships here at The Landing, where we're recording live today, supporting over 100 small businesses, also a trustee for Girl Guiding, and one of the fabulous Futurelist, of course, at Northern Power Women. A big thank you to all of you and hello. OK, the first question that has come in, and I'm excited to hear your reaction to this question, actually. But a BBC document revealing the salaries of some of its highest paid talent sparked a row about gender pay gap within the corporation. And I'm sure you saw the many, many articles that followed discussing why this gender pay gap still exists, not just within the BBC, but within all business. So a question that was raised a lot of times, and what I'd like to discuss now, is how much responsibility, personal responsibility, do women need to take for their own pay shortfalls? Reaction? That's what I thought. Maya, let me start with you.
So I guess you could go lots of different ways on this, and I think it's about everyone in society, I guess, coming together to solve this problem. But yes, I think that absolutely, women should take their responsibility. I think from my point of view, it's about where is the best place to take that responsibility and in what way. And I would say that actually, yes, you've got to speak up in your own workplace. Yes, you've got to negotiate and do all that kind of side of it within businesses. But I think it's a lot more powerful for women to take responsibility by actually creating their own systems and their own businesses and doing their own thing. I think a lot of the time, when you're doing it within an existing business, there are phenomenal glass ceilings and there are things that you're going to hit, and absolutely we can keep fighting to break those. But I think it can be exhausting, and I see a lot of women burning out that way because it's exhausting. And I think it's actually a lot easier to. It's still hard, but I do think it's easier to potentially create your own thing and actually create the way that you want that business to be. Increasingly, I think we're seeing women creating those businesses and actually ultimately not just creating businesses that work for women, but work for all different types of people across the spectrum, and creating businesses that support families better and support all different parts of society. So yeah, I think we do need to take our responsibility, but I think that responsibility also extends to looking after ourselves and taking care of our well-being. And actually sometimes that means there's different ways of taking responsibility that looks after yourself as well as your business, that isn't just constantly battling that might just burn you out.
Rebecca, you work in an industry within tech which isn't the most, it's been called not the most female-friendly of industries. Of course, it is a very male-dominated environment, and historically has been. Do you think there's pay disparity there, and are women doing enough, for want of a better phrase, to make sure that's not the case?
There's definitely pay disparity within the tech business, especially from what I experience. I do coach and mentor a lot of women in technology, especially from going from that employee level to that leadership level. And from the research that I've done, what I find, and it's very stereotype, is in terms of women tend to be a lot better at collaborating. We're natural collaborators, where men tend to be a lot more competitive. So when they're talking about pay rises and continuous developments, men tend to be more competitive and talk about what they've done, what projects I've done, what I've achieved, whereas us as women, we tend to go what we have achieved as a team, what we've achieved as an organisation. So what then tends to happen is that sort of gets overlooked. Women get overlooked in terms of when it comes for pay rises, and men get those promotions. I know from my own experience, I've worked on a leadership team of 13, being the only female. I had to fight for a pay rise. We tend to be a lot more prepared when we go into those meetings, but we definitely do have to fight a lot more, and we do have that responsibility to take more action upon it.
Do you think there's some responsibility, though, from employers as well, to recognise that men and women quite often present themselves in different ways? And because a woman isn't stood perhaps like a man by going, me, look at me, look what I've achieved, but is going, look what my team has achieved, is there also responsibility from them to see that is how women operate?
No, definitely. There definitely needs to be a massive education piece in terms of organisations. So I do quite a lot of work in terms of team effectiveness and getting companies to really understand in terms of different strengths within different individuals and different teams, and really big education needs to play on sort of the men of those leadership teams as well.
Erica Ingham from MediaCom. First of all, do you think women need to take more responsibility for our pay?
I think that's a bit of a cop-out, actually. I mean, it's very easy to say that, and then that's the end of the problem. It's women's problem because they're not speaking up, and I don't think that's the case. I think women can be more confident. Men definitely are better at asking for pay rises generally than women are.
Why? Why do you think that is?
I think it goes back to the old, if there's a job spec and women can do 90% of it, they won't apply, and if men can do 50% of it, they tend to. And I'm talking generally here, but I think there is a that, we're not as confident generally in the workplace. But I think, personally, it's the employer's responsibility to make sure that they do have equal pay. And often the woman doesn't know whether she's got equal pay or not. As we saw with the BBC report, there were quite a lot of women that weren't massively happy when that came out, who worked for the BBC, who undoubtedly were quite surprised. So, the staff aren't necessarily sort of empowered with that knowledge. So a business has a moral duty to make sure that they are paying the women the same as the men for doing the same job.
Quick question before we move on to the next question that we have. Just a yes or no answer. Have you personally ever asked for a pay rise, Maya?
Yes.
Erica?
Yes.
And Rebecca?
Yes.
Well, there we go, a full house. Role models right there. Brilliant stuff. Okay, well, question number 2. Now, this has actually come directly from someone who's been in touch with Northern Power Women, saying, as an employed young woman, when is it okay, or is it ever okay, to talk to your employer about the fact you want to have children? Is it ever okay to talk openly about this? Or should you, perhaps to protect your chances of promotion, keep it to yourself until you're actually pregnant? Now, Mary, you're the youngest woman on the panel today. You're not a mum, are you?
No.
What's your thoughts?
I guess there's an ideal answer, the ideal world, and there's the reality. I think from me, so absolutely me and a lot of my friends have these conversations, and I think I would love there to be in an ideal world, a world where you actually can discuss that. So obviously among my friends we talk about that, I talk about timescales when we might want to and stuff. And I think I would love to be in a position, because I think, your manager, line manager, should be someone that can coach you and advise you on those kind of things, and it would be brilliant if that can extend to lifestyle. I think in reality, I guess, from stories that you hear all the time, you have to be careful. And I guess it's that situation where, I don't know what the answer is, because obviously I've heard really positive stories and lots of negative stories as well. I think if, as a manager myself, I would always want to be able to have those conversations, be really open about it. I think it goes to that bigger picture of actually, once we get to a point where parental leave is completely equal and it's considered completely equal, and therefore, you're not penalised on either side. Therefore, it's not a case of, if you bring that up, it's considered a negative thing, or it's more likely that as a woman you're going to do it or not. I think once we get to that point and it feels more equal, then you might be in a safer position to be able to have those conversations openly. I guess at the moment, I think, from everything I've seen, stories and stuff, I think you've got to read the situation. You know the culture you're in, and whether it's something that's can be talked about or not, I guess.
Erica, what's your experience and also your thoughts on this?
Just got visions of a load of men making appointments to see the manager and saying they're planning on having children. Can't really see that happening somehow. I just don't think it's the employer's business at that point in time. And as a mum of 2 children, I know that you plan on having children, you don't necessarily get them, and when you're not planning, they sometimes turn up. So from a practical point of view, it seems irrelevant until you're actually in that situation, at which case obviously it shouldn't be a problem in the workplace.
But it's interesting, isn't it? You might have a group of men sat around, and one of whom's newly married or have been married a couple of years. He might be in his late 20s, early 30s, and people go, do you think you might have kids soon? And he would probably feel very differently about saying, well, yeah, we're thinking about it in the next 18 months than a woman of the same age would.
Yeah, quite. But, we should have an open and honest sort of workplace environment where people can discuss these things. But, I just don't think it's relevant to work, personally.
OK, let me ask you, please, Rebecca Taylor.
I can only really talk from personal experience, just to mirror what Erica said. I planned on having a family 3 years before my little boy actually came along. So if I had actually gone to my manager at that time and said, I'm thinking about starting a family, and then it took 3 years, the reality of the situation, his unconscious bias would have slipped in for those 3 years. I might not have got the promotion I got, I might have not been given the opportunities, because he might think, in 9 months' time or 10 months' time that should be going off on 9 months maternity leave. There's not enough work done around actually obviously encouraging more women coming back after career breaks, maternity leave being the main one. And we really need to focus in terms of actually supporting them going through that transition. You know, whoever's had that career break will know you lose your network, you lose your element of confidence, you lose the, you know, especially in the tech industry, it changes so fast. So there's tech skills that you lose. There's more support needed in terms of getting returnships back into work.
And just to show a hand, so I'm not going to name any names, anybody here discuss the fact they were thinking of having children with their managers before they actually got pregnant? One person in our audience here today, just one. Would anybody now think of discussing that? No? Is it because, show of hands, you think it's just your personal life and it's got nothing to do with work? About a third, that one. Okay, really interesting. Well, this is all about starting conversations, this panel, of course. So some really interesting conversations going to be started off the back of that, I'm sure. Okay, our final question today. This was actually inspired by our Person of Purpose interview on this episode 3 of the Northern Power Women podcast. You're going to hear that in a moment on the podcast. It's the CEO of the Lowry, Julia Fawcett. And in conversation with her, this issue came up, which I think is very interesting. As an employed woman or man, if you wish to work part-time or in a job share, can you expect to be given a senior role? And Erica, let me come to this one first, please, with you.
I mean, I think it's almost easier to do a senior role part-time because they're less operational. So practically it's a lot easier, a lot of time spent on emails and phone calls and meetings that you can schedule around that. So I think absolutely. And from a business point of view, if we're really precluding people who want flexibility at that level, then you're missing out on some hellish good candidates, which is a really bad idea.
And what about the notion of job sharing? Can you have, say, could your job as CFO, could it be you and another person working 2 and 3 days each or 2.5 days each? Would that work from an operational point of view?
I think it could work, but it would take very close collaboration between the person that you were job sharing with, and you'd have to have a really good transfer of information as you sort of handed off and picked up, if you know what I mean.
Would you consider employing 2 people and say the position directly under yours, or would you think, oh my goodness me, I've got to feed back to 2 people, get information from 2 people, it's too much?
Well, I think practically it might be quite handy, because if one was on holiday for a week, you'd have the other one in a bit. So, yeah, absolutely.
Rebecca, let me ask that to you. Senior positions, can anyone who wants a job share or to work part-time really reach for those high-up roles?
Definitely, living proof of it. So I'm co-founder of an organisation now. My previous role, I was global head of HR for a SaaS tech business, and I work part-time. I actually got promoted whilst I was working part-time and on maternity leave, so I'm living proof that it can happen. Just to echo what you said, it's in terms of you doing strategy work, so you need to get those off-site days, working from home, having that flexibility, having a clear mind to actually do those projects to move the business forward. So you're less likely to be needed in the office, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it definitely can work.
And what about the people who were working underneath you? Did they find it challenging? Did they think, oh, this has happened, oh, wait a minute, Rebecca's not in today, I can't get that support? Was there ever times like that?
Yeah, with the leadership team especially, and they were all men. So on a Friday, I did have to pick up the phone, answer Slack messages, etc. But I was quite clear in terms of, this is where I'm going to be, this is the day I'm not going to be working. And I was clear with my expectations. I think if you communicate effectively with them and say, right, I won't be answering the phone between this and this, or I'm off site between this day and this day, then, they can, unless it's really urgent, they can wait till 24 hours till I come back in.
Mm. We haven't got any men in the room today, and usually we do. It's a shame, actually, to know whether if they have any experience of that as well, or whether they would indeed wish to work part-time or in a job share, because it is sort of historically, I suppose, and anecdotally, more of a female employment situation. Maya, I mean, you are already a manager, of course, but 10, 15 years hence, when perhaps you may want a job share or work part-time, do you think that might preclude you from getting the really big roles?
Again, I think on a practical point of view, I think there's a lot of stigma still out there, but I think equally there's a lot of work being done to really champion those role models. So the Power Part-Time list is something that I found really useful. I think there's like a list of like 50 women on there who are all kind of working, and it's actually women and men working in part-time or job shares, which is really helpful. I think Becky touched on it as well, is that it speaks to, I think, a wider conversation around it's not just about women and men, but it's about the knowledge economy that we work in now, and the fact that actually working 4 days a week, regardless of whether you've got children or not. I think actually from a practical point of view might be actually a more healthy and a more effective way to work in a knowledge economy, because you need that time and that space to kind of have more downtime to think, and actually come up with some, now that we're not, we don't need to work that necessarily 9 to 5 because we're not in factories anymore. It's a different situation. So what really excites me about the conversations we have around working part-time and like that is actually it's not just about balancing things around family, which is a really important thing in itself, but also around actually what do our brains need and what do our workplaces need now. I think also you've got to look at the fact that, to Erica's point, that actually more senior roles can be more effective in part-time positions. And if you look at, plenty of men and women, but in the past men, NED roles and non-executive roles and things like that, they're all part-time. They're all kind of hands-off, kind of roles. So actually, it's about the story you tell as well. Like there's lots of men who've got portfolio careers around sort of part-time roles. Just because you're a woman or you're in a slightly different position doesn't mean that suddenly that's devalued. I think we've got to tell the story that actually it's a more effective way of working as well as being practical.
Just in terms of definitely an education piece needs to be done around companies in terms of about focusing on output rather than the numbers of hours worked. The amount of organisations that I go into and they talk about, that person's not working effectively, they're only doing like 7 hours a day, 9 to 5. But what does that matter? If they're producing the output, an effective output, then they should. That's great performance. It shouldn't be about how many hours that you work within an organisation.
Thank you all so much. Inspiration for a lunchtime. Our podcast panel. Thank you so much then to Rebecca Taylor, to Maya Dibley and also to Erica Ingham. Please do tell everyone you know about the Northern Power Women podcast, and thank you so much for coming today. Thank you again to our brilliant panellists. If you'd like to take part in the future or you've got a suggestion for a discussion, please do get in touch. Just email podcast@northernpowerwomen.com. That's podcast@northernpowerwomen.com. Now it's time to delve into the mind of an individual at the very top of their game and find out what really makes them tick. What makes a successful person? What difficult decisions have they had to make? And how have they overcome challenges? Today, you hear from Julia Fawcett. She's the Chief Executive of the Lowry in Salford, one of the largest performance and visual arts centres in the UK. And our conversation started when I asked her if she'd always known which area of business she wanted to work in.
No, I had absolutely no idea. I was the typical teenager, didn't know what I wanted to be, didn't know what I wanted to do. Probably, sort of would have wandered around aimlessly for a few years. And I think certain things happened by accident that had an impact and changed me. And from there on in, maybe I began to be a little bit more sort of pre-planned and, strategic about my career.
So what happened?
Well, I wanted to be an actor. And I trained to be an actor, and I graduated, and I tried to get some work and didn't find that at all easy, and had to obviously keep a roof over my head and eat. So I did what many would-be actors would do. I went home to mum and dad, and I had to get casual work to, keep things ticking over. And I got a casual job in this new visitor attraction that was opening in Manchester called Granada Studios. And it was sort of being set up as this answer to the Disney idea in Manchester, tours of Coronation Street. So I started there as a casual, hourly paid tour guide, and in 5 years I was the general manager.
Wow, that's quite a meteoric rise. Before we talk about that, I want to go back to the fact that you had dreams. You had long-held dreams. Was it difficult when you realised that perhaps those dreams weren't going to come true? Because we're always told, don't give up on your dreams. But there does become a time when you think, this isn't going to happen. How did that feel?
I think part of it was the fact that so many people were in the same boat as me. So, people that I was at college with, people that I was studying drama with over 3 or 4 years, we were all in a similar position. We all dreamed of being actors and directors and playwrights. And, it is true. There is talent and there is resilience and there is hard work, and there's also a really good dose of good luck. And sometimes you just got to know when to say, well, that's just not going to work out for me. But the one thing I would say in business, I found that those early skills of acting and performing, they've not gone to waste.
Oh, that's interesting. So you find yourself drawing on some of the skills you learn. Can you give me a situation?
Well, maybe in the earlier years, particularly as a young manager, you'd go to... there are things that you have to do for the first time. So as you sort of progress through your career, there is a point at which you will go to your first board meeting or your first senior level meeting. You'll never have done that before. And I think anyone would find that to be somewhat intimidating. I think for people who've had a bit of a chance to practice, shall we say, the art of being something that you're not entirely, being true to yourself, I think that those skills were really useful. I just pretended to be a really good manager until such a time as that I was a half decent manager, that's the truth.
So that's really interesting, and I know a lot of people listening are at very different stages in their career, and you're right, we've all walked into the room and we've thought, it's famously called imposter syndrome, isn't it, where we think, I shouldn't be here, and the irony is everyone feels that way. But what tips could you give then for people walking into that situation when they don't feel sure of themselves?
Well, I think preparation is the absolute key, because a lot of people just wing it. And if you are as prepared as you can possibly be, and if you can go into that meeting knowing what you want to get across, even if it's just 2 or 3 key points, if you sit there for the whole of an hour-long meeting, but you make the 2 or 3 points that are crucial in terms of what you want to communicate, then I think that that's a really good steer. It's not dominating the meeting. It's not the person who feels the need to listen to their own voice. It's the person who comes in and actually makes the crucial interjections that really change the outcome. And I've very often observed that those kind of observations and the way in which meetings can be influenced in that way, very often it is women that can do that.
Did you ever feel as a woman in those high-level meetings early on in your career that your voice wasn't heard?
I think possibly not, but part of the reason for that was that the organisation that I was in was fairly male-dominated, and we are talking the 80s now, so, big shoulder pads, you had to, the whole sort of Margaret Thatcher thing. So in a way, I think part of what I would do differently is not try to be as masculine or come over as macho as some of the men. So I think I kind of muscled my way in a bit. But, lots of things happened during that time. I had my first baby, and one of the managers said that it was unfortunate timing for the business, So it was a very different world in the 80s. And I think a lot of women felt that in order to make it, you had to pretend to be more like the boys. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's true.
So let's get back to your really, really rapid rise from casual member of staff to, what was the title you had again?
General manager within 5 years. So it was an unusual situation in that it was a new business, and although it was associated to the television studios, it was an entirely new management group, a new startup effectively. And in startups, there are lots of opportunities for people to show their skills and get stuck in. And I did, and ultimately I took on sort of an operational role. I went to study at college and took some qualifications actually in HR management. I thought that was something that I needed to learn and develop skills in, and then ultimately progress through the management structure, became general manager before leaving the organisation after 10 years to become a CEO of a new facility.
How did you cope with going back into work after having children? Because I know there's a lot of talk at the moment about returnships, about women who've taken time out, quite often quite a few years. And there is nervousness sometimes, a reticence and a fear.
Well, the situation that I was in, I think I was really fortunate, and I don't for 1 minute think that most women are in this situation, so I think I was really lucky. We'd taken the decision that my husband would be the primary carer for our children, so I took a relatively small period of time off work after my first child, and even less after my second. But that was knowing that I had my husband at home, and his primary role was to take care of the kids. So I was able to return to work fairly quickly, and I suppose I was really keen to demonstrate that I was still as keen, still as ambitious, still as hardworking. and obviously that does create a kind of a tension, that whole sort of balance, work-life balance issue. I don't think it's easy to crack. But I do think that one thing that has sort of encouraged me to think about is how others in my own organisation then are able to return to work after having children. So I'm not saying that my solution was the right one for anybody. I'm not even entirely always sure that it was the right one for me, but it was what we had to work with, and we were fortunate enough to be able to do that.
As you rose up quite quickly in those early years of your career, being, as you said, you were in a male-dominated environment, was there ever a tension there? Was there ever a sense of, who's this young whippersnapper, sitting around the board table? How did your colleagues react?
Yeah, you would get a lot of that. I'm 5'2", so particularly when I took on my first chief exec role, I was 32, 5'2", and inevitably, if I was going out to a meeting with one of my team who might be male, they would inevitably be taller than me and quite often older than me, and you'd always get that situation where people would greet the male as being the most senior, and we used to sort of laugh about it and just sort of accept that was part of the way in which women would be treated. I don't think I would be as accepting now, but at the time you just sort of smiled and took it.
What advice would you give now for someone who walks into the room and yes, their male, possibly older, possibly taller colleague is greeted?
I know it sounds really trite, but just be smarter and just work harder and just be determined to achieve your goals and your objectives and not worry about it too much, because you can't always influence or change people's habits, behaviours and culture, but you can influence your own behaviour and mannerisms and the way you treat other people. So, make sure that you yourself aren't practising those behaviours, but ultimately just get on doing what you're there to do and try and let it wash over you. It's not always easy. I was once pinched on the cheek by a very senior person who said, it's always good to know who to blame when things go wrong. So, I have been there. I know how difficult it is, but, the best form of, revenge in those situations is just to carry on doing what you're doing and succeed.
Is to do good work. Yeah, just do good work. Do you not find it frustrating, though, that you've got to be smarter, got to think ahead? There's all this extra pressure on just to be considered equal.
I don't see it that way. I think people who want to succeed, male, female, young, old, I think they've got that drive anyway. They know that they have to work hard. There are very few of us who can get by in life by not working hard and not really trying to be smarter, faster, braver, whatever. I don't think that's a female thing.
Did you ever feel stuck in your career path? Because you started off, you hit the ground running, you were phenomenally successful, CEO by the age of 32. Was there ever moments where you thought, I can't get out of where I am, I don't know where to turn next?
Yeah, I think there was a period sort of when I'd been a manager for 8 or 9 years, and there was a period where I was working in a group structure, and the next level of progression would have taken me into a different sector, so away from the area that I had the passion for, which was working with people, working in the entertainment industry, leisure, and the next progression would have been to move into a different sector within the same company. And I really, really wrestled with that. I'd spent 10 years building up my reputation. I'd got to the point where that next step was on the table, but it was taking me into a direction that I knew I genuinely did not want to go in. And so that was really, really difficult. And I took a different path. I went and set up a Millennium-funded visitor attraction. And at the time, so this is pre, Millennium Dome and all those great stories, it was pre the sense that these things could be successful in their own right. And at the time, all that they had was this sort of narrative around they're going to fail, they're going to be a landscape full of white elephants. And I just thought, well, I'd rather do that and have a go at it. And I really feel as if I can take the skills I've learned here and go over there and have a shot at it. And I'd rather do that than stay here and progress into something that I just do not feel that I really want to do. And when I think back to when I went to university, I really wanted to go and study drama. I wanted to go to drama school. My Mum and Dad didn't want me to go to drama school. They want me to go to university. And so I went to university to study drama. But to this day, my family think I studied drama and English at university. So there's something there about, being true to yourself. And actually, I think I've learned to be true to myself. And that was the first time in a career sense that I had to do that. And it was just, no, I'm going to follow the area or the passion or the skill set that I think that I enjoy and gives me the most kind of reward. It's what I like to do.
But you took a big risk, as you just said. You took a big risk doing that. How did that feel?
Terrifying, utterly terrifying. And for months and months and months, I thought I was going to be sacked. My husband will actually tell you there was an occasion where I went into work and I telephoned him and I said, I'm going to be sacked. I've been called to this meeting and I know that I'm going to be sacked. And he said, well, why? What have you done? I don't have nothing. I'm just rubbish. I'm just not being very good in this role and I'm going to be sacked today. And I went to the meeting, and of course the meeting was about something entirely different, and I was just so completely wrong. And that was another lesson on how you can kind of lose things yourself, just in terms of your own head and the way that you think about things. And so that was a really tough period, very isolating, and very much feeling that you had to succeed. You had no option but to succeed.
And so how did you work through that? I mean, have you ever worked with mentors? Your husband obviously very key in supporting you through your career, but did you ever have any people outside your family in that sort of mentorship role who could help you through?
I think informally, so lots of close colleagues and people that I trusted and would discuss those things with. But there's a shame that comes with not feeling that you're good enough, and that shame means that you'd go and have a conversation with your mentor and somebody you trust, and you would talk about the things that were slightly challenging, but you wouldn't always talk about those things that were at the inner core of, I feel really vulnerable in this situation because I just don't feel that I'm up to this particular task or role or job. So I don't think I did share much of that with anyone other than my husband. But I am really keen to sort of point out that I do think there was something about a culture of a time, and I do like to think that things have improved somewhat in that regard. And I think people can be more open now and saying, well, I'm new into this role and I do need some support in order for me to be as good as I can be. I don't think I was good at asking for that support, and it certainly wasn't being offered at that time.
So someone in that very senior role, if someone who works for you now came to you and said, Julia, I don't think I'm up to this. I don't think I'm doing a good job. All the things that we fear at some point during our careers. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think part of it is talking through those fears and putting in place some concrete plans that if people know what they can do to work on areas of their role, I think that makes a tremendous difference. Just actually being open about it, and being open about it enables you to have a conversation where you say, actually, you're really good at that. Do you remember when you did this, or do you remember when that happened? And you can kind of, push back a little bit on some of their own preconceptions. But at the same time, if there are areas where they do need help and support, then you're in a position to offer that and give that. But I think it has to be done in an environment and a culture of trust, because if there's no trust, then somebody's not going to open up to you and say, actually, I'm feeling pretty rubbish about this particular thing that I've got to do. So I think all of this goes back to just having an atmosphere and an environment of trust within organisations.
And that should come from the top down.
100% should come from the top, and if people don't feel that degree of safety and comfort and confidence, then it doesn't matter how good they are and how ambitious they are. I don't think they'll ever reach their full potential.
How have you dealt with criticism, whether it's been at a kind of micro level, whether it's been managers of yours or people you've worked with in your team who've been critical of perhaps the way you've worked, or at a more public level? You're in a very public facing organisation now. How have you personally dealt with that?
I don't think I'm very good at dealing with criticism. Like lots of people, if I get a piece of feedback, if I read a review of something we've done, if I read an interview, I will ignore the 90 positive things in that interview, and I will focus on the one slightly negative or even very negative comment that was made, and that is the thing that I will focus on. I think that's a really bad habit. I definitely don't think it's helpful. It's a really hard one to crack, and I do carry on trying to deal with it. I think one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given, and this is to do with career now, was you are going to get criticism. You are going to find some really tough, times. Make sure that in your work life you are able to touch on the things that really are important and matter to you. So it's things like, the stuff to do with my family, stuff to do with friends, the stuff that makes me. It's not just about work, so that when things are really, really tough, I can remember that I'll still go home tonight and feed the kids and watch a bit of telly, or, and that life still goes on. And that's the best piece of advice I've ever been given.
What are you most proud of in your career?
Well, I'm really proud that I've been able in my career to make a great organisation. This was a new place, this job that I've got now, this was a new organisation. And, I've been here for 15 years and I'm proud of what we as a team have achieved. I'm proud of the fact that I do a job that I really enjoy. And I'm proud that I think that we've got a culture and an atmosphere here where everybody's doing amazing things. We've got such a great team and an environment and a culture that supports that. So I'm really proud of that. And I'm dead proud of the fact that I've been able to achieve that in the city that I was born and grew up in.
Huge thank you to Julia Fawcett, the CEO of the Lowry. Now, if there's a man or a woman that you'd love to hear on this podcast, please do get in touch. You can tweet at North Power Women or email podcast@northernpowerwomen.com. Thank you. So before episode 3 comes to a close, it's time for Ask The Hive. This is a chance for you to ask a question on something you're interested in, confused by, or maybe stuck with in your career. You ask, and then through the power of the brilliant minds connected with Northern Power Women, you get some answers. Now, in a moment, you'll hear next month's question from Sarah. But first, this month, Kirsty got in touch and you responded.
I work for a web development company in Manchester, and I come across lots of teams that are made up of young, white, middle-class men from usually affluent backgrounds, but I want to know if there are anything we can do to encourage more people from working-class backgrounds.
Well, I don't work in this organisation now, but in one of my previous lives, I worked in a high school as the arts coordinator and work experience person for all the children, all of them. And what I learned then was if you don't get them young, you haven't got them, because by the time they get to year 10, even year 9, they've decided what they want to be. And that might be a footballer, but they've still decided. And so if you get them a little bit younger, when they're still sort of formulating those ideas, they're already playing Minecraft, they're already designing, they're already, in some cases, coding at year 7 and even younger. So that's when you need to get them. You go into those underprivileged schools and you introduce it to them then, and you give them the resources then.
So my wife works in Harper Hay as a teacher, and that's one of the poorest places in the country. Now, on the best case scenario, kids don't have hot water in their house, and on the worst case scenario, the teachers are providing the girls with sanitary towels because they can't even afford that. So if you're going to be targeting someone, you need to give them a sense of ability to do something and show them a different light at the school age. After that, you've actually lost them. And a lot of the kids that go into school there, and they're going up to year, whatever it is, 12, 13, 14, whatever they come to, they are only focused on making a little bit of money to survive, and they do not have that belief in themselves, and they do not see a way out of their situation. If you're trying to target them afterwards, you've already lost the battle. That's where you actually need to target them.
Maybe we could have more apprenticeships as well. You know, like plumbing and other hands-on crafts. I see development as the same type of thing. You're building. It's a similar thing. And if you have an apprenticeship similar to those, I think that could really help.
I think if we could do scholarship type scheme for start-up businesses, that would probably introduce a lot more people from working class background, because it would give them the means to survive, like personally, not even as a business, to be able to feed themselves and live whilst developing a business. Because I think that's what's putting people off. When you're from a working class family, you can't just go to your family and say, can I have some cash for this? Because typically they don't have it.
So I run an event called Chicks in Advertising, which is all about getting women involved in advertising or people who are interested in it. And one thing that we found is that there's been a permanent discussion about you can't be what you can't see. And one of the things that I would advise for, companies who are looking to create startups and particularly create some more diversity in tech is that there must already be role models in this area, and there seemingly isn't. The kind of role models that we have are so high up, like Bill Gates or Alan Sugar, that we really can't see where the middle ground is. And it would be much better, I think, both for women and different races and anyone who's trying to create diversity in startups or tech, to have a reflection of themselves. Maybe that's in schools or maybe it's in hubs, but somewhere where people could see that actually what they want to achieve is achievable as opposed to being a dream.
Something that a good working class friend was saying to me about just kind of schools and private schools and comprehensive schools was like, so I'm distinctly middle class and I went to a private school, which I often feel quite ashamed of for some reason, but this friend was telling me that in private schools people have this kind of thing drummed into them that they're better than everyone else and they can achieve whatever they want and they're entitled to achieve whatever they want. But apparently in comprehensive schools you're not given that message as much and you're not made to think in that way.
I live in Ancoats, basically from where I can see out my window, which is on one side there's the gentrified part of Manchester and then there's Ancoats Estate opening up. So basically there's loads of great work going on at the moment in startups, in new thinking. We've just got to put some of those hubs in different places, and that's one of the things, so people can see. The other thing that would be really good is to connect up with already existing organisations. Reclaim is a fantastic charity that works with young working class people in Greater Manchester, and they're rolling out nationally. They work with young people looking at leadership and inspiring them to articulate ideas. Those young people know what the future's about digitally. They know this actually, and so it's actually connecting that up. So some of the work that's happening there, they can be incredible role models. So it's also and it's the usual thing of not being in your bubble, isn't it?
There needs to be more awareness that there's those type of courses now available at university, because people just buy into the lie that you have to go and be an accountant or a lawyer or an architect, and they don't realise that there's so many cool media tech driven courses that they could go and do that could label career, that won't just be a useless degree at the end of it. And more those degrees are getting recognised, whereas when they first got introduced there was a bit of like scepticism around them, but more and more people are starting to recognise the usefulness of tech and how important it is in our life.
One of the key things really, and it's not just for people who are from backgrounds that may be less affluent and working class, but the whole range of diversity, is that they've got to get education or access to education. That's the key thing. So to work for a tech startup, I think that presupposes several things. Number one, you have the skill set to do so, which I think is a presumption. Also, you have the cultural capital or the capital to do so. I think the working class bit cuts out one of those problems, isn't it? As in, I don't have the capital to start my own business. But that doesn't mean you can't work for someone who does have the capital. So that's the difference. But if you don't have the skill set, then you can't do anything anyway. So actually, working class people, or women, or people from ethnic minorities, or any of these things, actually the most important thing really is education. So things like UTC, University Technical College, which is based in Media City, that's the reason why it exists. So people from different backgrounds can get into tech. They can start their own business, yes, but actually they can work for them. A really big one though is they have to learn coding, and coding is going to be the key thing. So actually, how can you get more working class people into tech? You can teach coding more from a younger age, and you can wait for a bit because that's all that's going to happen. So at UTC we have, I think, 102 different feeder schools. So it's not just Salford and the surrounding areas, it's the whole of the northwest. And obviously they're not all from Cheshire. They're not, this is the way of the world. However, a lot of them sadly are from richer areas. Now, why is that? Is that because, I don't know, more affluent people believe that coding's a good thing to do? I don't know. Is it because they're given enough time to believe that? I don't know. What I do know is if we can get the education message out there to less affluent areas, we've got more of a chance of getting more working class people in tech.
So you can learn to code online, and it takes 6 weeks, and it's free, right? But most people just, don't know that. Like, you just have no idea. A lot of people do have laptops and like phones and whatever else, and it's not necessarily, that difficult to get hold of one of those things, but you just don't know. They don't know that you can, study this stuff.
Maybe the education system, and there has been many talks on this the last few months, years, is the education system hasn't changed one bit. And it might come down to the individual teacher who changes things up a little bit, but tiny, like a small amount. But a true change needs to happen, which I think the education as it is and the curriculum is based on getting people into full-time employment. And full-time employment isn't really the norm anymore. It's not 9 to 5. Dolly Parton was completely wrong. But it is more based on you can work your own hours, you can make your own dreams come true, with reason obviously, but is that there are achievable goals where you can be your own boss.
Thank you so much to everyone who took part this month. Some really interesting food for thought there. Have you got a question, a problem, a dilemma that you need some help with? Do get in touch. Just email podcast@northernpowerwomen.com and we'll do the rest. Now, over this next month, the question for your consideration, something which I think affects so many of us, comes from Sarah.
I am Sarah Starling. I'm a self-employed voiceover. I've worked in the media for 25 years. I worked for the BBC for a very long time, across TV and radio, and I've been self-employed as a voiceover for 10 years. Recently, I joined a business forum on Facebook. And I asked this question of myself. My female colleagues regularly ask this of themselves, and we talk about it between ourselves. Why is it that we as women, successful women, don't feel confidence, question our skills constantly, whereas men don't seem to, or if they do, they keep it very quiet? How can we change that?
Thank you so much to Sarah for submitting that question, and we cannot wait to hear what experiences or knowledge that you can share. And we really look forward to hearing what both men and women have got to say on this. If you can help, please record your answer using the voice memo on your smartphone and then email podcast@northernpowerwomen.com, or open up WhatsApp on your phone and add the Northern Power Women podcast on 07928 387 712. That's 07928 387 712. To record your answer on WhatsApp, you just use the little microphone icon right next to the message box. Hold down that while you talk, take your finger off the button, and your message will be sent. All the details you need to be part of the conversation you can find online at northernpowerwomen.com. Again, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for all your feedback. We would love you to subscribe and leave a review or a rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. The next episode arrives on October the 3rd, and until then, this is the Northern Power Women podcast. I'm Sam Walker, and this has been a What Goes On media production for Northern Power Women.